To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Lance Goldstein had built his life on three principles: loyalty, preparation, and patience. At 34, he turned his grandfather's modest construction company into Goldstein Development, a mid-sized firm that renovated historic buildings throughout Boston. The work was honest, the margins were tight, but Lance took pride in preserving the city's architectural heritage. His marriage to Rebecca Anthony had followed the same careful blueprint. They'd met at a charity gala 6 years ago. She was the development director for a nonprofit. He was the main sponsor. Rebecca was magnetic: auburn hair, sharp green eyes, and a laugh that commanded attention. Her mother, Marjorie Anthony, came from old Boston money, though most of it had evaporated through her late husband's poor investments. Rebecca carried herself like wealth was her birthright, and Lance found himself drawn to her confidence. The warning signs were subtle. Rebecca's expensive tastes never quite aligned with their actual income. She resented that Lance refused to take shortcuts on projects to maximize profits over quality. "You're too soft," she'd say, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Your grandfather would have known when to compromise." But the real crack appeared 6 months ago when Rebecca hired Greg Potter as her executive secretary at the nonprofit. Potter was 31, with slicked-back dark hair and a smile that belonged on a used car lot. He wore suits that cost more than his salary should allow and drove a Mercedes that screamed lease beyond your means. "Greg's brilliant," Rebecca gushed at dinner one night. "He's completely reorganized our donor database. We're going to triple our contributions." Lance had nodded, pushing his pasta around his plate. He'd done his homework. Potter had been fired from 2 previous nonprofits under murky circumstances. When Lance mentioned this, Rebecca exploded. "You're checking up on my staff? How controlling can you be?" The fights escalated. Rebecca stayed late at the office more nights than not. She password-protected her phone. She looked at Lance with something approaching contempt. Then came Tuesday evening. Lance was reviewing blueprints at their brownstone in Back Bay when he heard Rebecca's key in the lock. But she wasn't alone. Greg Potter walked in behind her, carrying 2 suitcases. "Lance, we need to talk," Rebecca said, her voice flat and businesslike. Lance set down his pencil. "I'm listening." "Greg is moving in. He'll be taking the guest room." She said it the way someone might announce they were switching grocery stores. "I'm done pretending this marriage works. You're boring, predictable, and you're holding me back from the life I deserve." Potter stood behind her, his expression a mix of smugness and wariness. "The life you deserve," Lance repeated slowly. He stood, his 6-foot frame calm and controlled. He'd learned in his construction days never to show emotion when someone was trying to provoke you. "And what life is that, exactly?" "A life with someone who understands ambition," Rebecca snapped. "Someone who isn't content renovating old buildings for pennies. Greg gets it. We have plans, real plans." Lance's eyes flicked to Potter, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Plans," Lance said. "Interesting choice of words. If you don't like it, there's the door," Rebecca said, gesturing dramatically. Lance had been preparing for this moment longer than Rebecca knew. He'd seen the deleted texts, the suspicious transfers from their joint account, the weekend conferences that didn't exist. He'd hired a private investigator 3 months ago, a former cop named Terry Garza who specialized in domestic cases. But Lance said none of this. Instead, he walked upstairs to his office, pulled out a go bag he'd packed 2 weeks ago, and grabbed the safe deposit box key he kept hidden behind a family photo. The box contained copies of everything he'd need: financial records, property deeds, Terry's investigation files, and a USB drive with recordings from the nanny cam he'd installed in the home office after noticing documents had been moved. Rebecca was making coffee in the kitchen, laughing at something Potter was saying, when Lance came back down 15 minutes later. "That was fast," she said, not even trying to hide her satisfaction. "I thought you'd make a bigger scene." "I don't do scenes," Lance said quietly. He paused at the door. "But Rebecca, you should be more careful about who you make plans with." Her face flickered with confusion, but Lance was already walking out into the October night. He drove to an extended-stay hotel near his company's office in Dorchester. As he unpacked his bag, his phone buzzed with a text from Terry Garza. "Followed them like you asked. Potter's bringing in more boxes. Also found something interesting about his last job. Call me." Lance set the phone down and stared at the bland hotel room. The old Lance would have fought for his marriage, begged Rebecca to reconsider, tried to fix what was broken. But the old Lance hadn't seen the contempt in his wife's eyes, hadn't heard her say he was holding her back, hadn't spent 3 months documenting her betrayal while she flaunted it in his face. This Lance understood that some things couldn't be fixed. They could only be demolished and rebuilt from the foundation up. Chapter 2. The Investigation. The next morning, Lance met Terry Garza at a diner in Southie. Terry was 53, built like a bulldog, with gray hair, cropped military short. He'd worked homicide for 20 years before a knee injury put him on disability. Now he ran a discreet investigation service for Boston's cautious middle class. "You look like hell," Terry said as Lance slid into the booth. "Didn't sleep much." Lance ordered coffee, black, no sugar. "You said you found something?" Terry pulled out a folder. Greg Potter's a piece of work. At his last job, Harbor Lights Foundation, he didn't just get fired. He orchestrated a donation scheme, convinced donors to make cash gifts, skimmed 30% before depositing the rest. They couldn't prove it definitively, so they paid him severance to go away quietly. And Rebecca hired him knowing this. "Gets better." Terry slid over a printed email. "This is from Potter to your wife, dated 4 months ago. He's not just her affair partner. They're planning something with your company." Lance read the email twice. Potter was advising Rebecca on how to access Lance's business accounts, suggesting she use her power of attorney, a document Lance had signed years ago for estate planning purposes. The emails outlined a strategy to gradually transfer funds and position Rebecca as the primary owner of Goldstein Development. "She's trying to steal my company," Lance said quietly. "Not just steal it. Look at the later emails." Terry pointed to another document. "They're planning to force you out, tank the company's reputation with a few strategic project failures, then sell the assets. Potter has a buyer lined up, some developer who wants your contracts and your city connections without the overhead." Lance felt a cold rage settle in his chest. This wasn't just infidelity. This was calculated betrayal, a systematic plan to destroy everything he'd built. "How much have they transferred so far?" "About 60,000. Small enough to not trigger immediate alerts, but your accounts are set up to allow it." Terry leaned back. "You need a lawyer, Lance." "Today. I've already retained one. Sherry Bauer. She handled my grandfather's estate. She's good, and she's ruthless." Lance pulled out his phone. "But I need more before I make my move." "What about Potter's background?" "Criminal record. Clean, officially. But I talked to a buddy in Chicago PD. Potter was questioned in connection with a harassment case 3 years ago, allegedly stalked an ex-girlfriend. Never charged, but the detective said Potter gave him the creeps. Called him the type who always has an angle." Lance absorbed this. "What about Rebecca? What's she been doing the past few days?" Terry grimaced. "Living like a newlywed. She and Potter are practically staging their relationship for social media. She's posting photos, taking him to restaurants. Your favorite restaurants, by the way. It's deliberately provocative. She wants me to react," Lance said. "She's hoping I'll do something stupid, show up drunk, cause a scene, maybe even get physical. Then she can paint me as the villain, claim she was afraid, strengthen her position in the divorce." "You're thinking clearly for a guy whose wife just moved her boyfriend in." "I had 3 months to get used to the idea." Lance finished his coffee. "I need you to keep following them. Document everything. Where they go, who they see, what they spend. Also, dig into Rebecca's nonprofit work. If Potter was running scams before, I want to know if they're doing it now." "What are you planning?" Lance stood, dropping cash on the table. "I'm going to give them exactly enough rope to hang themselves. But first, I need to secure my company and figure out how deep this goes." The next 3 days were a blur. Lance met with Sherry Bauer, who immediately filed paperwork to revoke Rebecca's power of attorney and freeze the joint accounts. He spent hours with his accountant, Roland Glenn, forensically examining every transaction. They found evidence of 9 separate transfers totaling $73,000. Money Rebecca had moved to an account in her name only. "She's been systematic," Roland said, his round face creased with worry. "This wasn't impulsive. She planned this for months." Lance also met with his foreman, Jimmy Reynolds, a tough kid from Southie who'd worked his way up from day laborer. Jimmy had been loyal to Lance for 8 years, ever since Lance gave him a shot despite his juvie record. "Boss, some of the guys have been asking questions. Jimmy said. They heard rumors about you and Rebecca splitting. It's true, but the company's solid. Nobody's jobs are at risk. What about the Harbor Street project? Mrs. Goldstein called yesterday asking about timeline delays. Lance's jaw tightened. What did you tell her? Nothing. Said she needed to talk to you. But boss, she had Potter with her. They were asking about the project budget, the client contacts. Jimmy's expression darkened. I don't trust that guy. He looks at everything like he's calculating what he can steal. From now on, all project information goes through me only. Rebecca is not authorized to access company business. Make sure the crew knows. On the 5th day, Lance was reviewing updated contracts when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Lance. The voice was Marjorie Anthony's, Rebecca's mother. But she sounded wrong, shaky, tearful. Marjorie? What's wrong? Honey, I don't know how to tell you this. She was crying now, genuine sobs that made Lance's chest tighten despite everything. Your wife? She's in the hospital. Something terrible has happened. Chapter 3, The Revelation. Massachusetts General Hospital's emergency wing smelled like antiseptic and desperation. Lance pushed through the automatic doors, his mind racing through possibilities. Car accident? Medical emergency? Had Potter hurt her? He found Marjorie in the waiting area, her carefully maintained appearance crumbling. Her gray hair was uncombed, her expensive blouse wrinkled. When she saw Lance, she stood and grabbed his hands. Thank God you came. I wasn't sure you would, after everything. What happened to Rebecca? Marjorie's face twisted. She's alive, but Lance, she's been arrested. She's in the ER under police guard. Arrested? That wasn't what he'd expected. For what? They're saying fraud. Money laundering. The FBI came to my house this morning. Marjorie's voice cracked. They showed me documents, bank records. They say Rebecca and that man Potter have been stealing from her nonprofit for over a year. Nearly $400,000. Lance felt like the floor had tilted. The FBI? One of the major donors was a federal judge whose wife died last year. He gave $100,000 in her memory. When his accountant was reviewing his taxes, they noticed the donation never appeared on the nonprofit's public filings. He reported it, and the FBI investigated. Marjorie collapsed into a chair. How did I raise someone capable of this? A doctor emerged, followed by 2 people in FBI windbreakers. One was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, Special Agent Andrea Vaughn, according to her badge. Are you Lance Goldstein? She asked. I am. We need to talk. Your wife's awake and asking for you. Why would I want to see her? Agent Vaughn's expression was unreadable. Because she's claiming you were involved in the fraud. Says you helped launder the money through your construction company. The rage Lance had been controlling for days threatened to surface. That's a lie. I believe you. We've been investigating for 6 weeks, and your name never came up until she was cornered. Vaughn gestured toward a consultation room. But we need your cooperation. Your wife and Greg Potter ran a sophisticated scheme. They created shell companies, false donation receipts, the works. Potter's the brains. He's done this before. But your wife was the access point. Her family name, her connections, gave them credibility. How did she end up in the ER? Panic attack when we arrested her this morning. Her blood pressure spiked. Doctors wanted to monitor her. Vaughn studied Lance. Mr. Goldstein, I've seen your financial records as part of our investigation. Your wife has been systematically stealing from you too. Smaller amounts, but the pattern's clear. I know. I've been documenting it. Vaughn's eyebrows rose. You have evidence? I have everything. Lance pulled out his phone, brought up the secure cloud folder where he'd stored all of Terry's findings. 3 months of investigation. Financial records, emails, surveillance footage. I was preparing for a divorce. I didn't know about the federal fraud. Can you share this with us? On one condition, I want full immunity in writing, and I want Rebecca to know the evidence came from me. Vaughn smiled, a predatory expression. Mr. Goldstein, I think we're going to get along fine. 20 minutes later, Lance stood outside Rebecca's room. Through the window, he could see her lying in the hospital bed, for in her arm, looking smaller and paler than he'd ever seen her. An officer stood guard at the door. Agent Vaughn had explained the full scope. Rebecca and Potter had stolen over $400,000 from the nonprofit over 18 months. They'd created false donor accounts, duplicated legitimate donations, and funneled money through a series of shell companies Potter had set up. The plan was to disappear with the money, Flee to the Cayman Islands where Potter had already secured bank accounts and a rental property. She was going to leave you with nothing, Vaughn had said. Your company sabotaged, your reputation ruined, your assets drained. Potter's previous employer thinks he was planning the same thing there before they caught on. Now Lance entered the room. Rebecca's eyes opened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely frightened. Then her expression hardened. I knew you'd come. You always were predictable. The FBI tells me you're trying to blame me for your crimes. It's your word against mine. Lance pulled up a chair, his movements deliberate. Rebecca, they have everything. Bank records, email trails, testimony from Potter's previous victims. You're going to prison. The only question is for how long. Her face paled. Greg said we'd be protected. He said he'd covered everything. Greg Potter is a professional con artist. He's probably already trying to cut a deal, blaming everything on you. Lance leaned forward. But here's what you don't know. I've been investigating you for 3 months. I have recordings of you and Potter planning to destroy my company. I have evidence of every dollar you stole from our accounts. And I just gave all of it to the FBI. Rebecca's expression crumbled. You were watching me? You got sloppy. You wanted me to know about the affair, wanted to hurt me. But you forgot that I built a successful company by paying attention to details. Lance stood. You said I was boring and predictable. You were right about predictable. I can predict exactly what happens next. Potter flips on you to reduce his sentence. Your mother loses whatever's left of the family money paying for lawyers. And you spend the next 5 to 10 years in a federal prison. Lance, please. Her voice broke. We can fix this. I made mistakes. I'll tell them everything. Give back the money. There is no we. There hasn't been for a long time. He walked toward the door, then paused. You wanted a life you deserved, Rebecca. Congratulations. You got it. In the hallway, Agent Vaughn was waiting. Potter's in custody. He's already trying to deal, just like you said. What happens now? We'll need you to testify about the theft from your personal accounts. With your evidence and Potter's testimony, your wife's looking at serious time. The nonprofit will likely collapse, but the major donors will recoup most of their losses from seizures. Lance nodded. One more question. How much warning did you give them before the arrest? None. Why? Because Greg Potter is smarter than he looks. If he had time, he would have had an escape plan. Vaughn's phone buzzed. She read the message, and her expression darkened. Potter's apartment was searched an hour ago. They found burner phones, fake IDs, and $50,000 cash hidden in the walls. You're right. He was ready to run. What about the Cayman Islands account? Frozen as of this morning. He won't touch that money. Vaughn extended her hand. Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Your evidence made this case airtight. As Lance walked out of the hospital, he felt lighter than he had in months. This wasn't the revenge he'd been planning, that had involved lawyers and divorce courts and strategic humiliation. This was better. This was justice delivered by people with real power, and all he'd had to do was hand them the rope. But as he drove back to his hotel, Lance realized something. This wasn't over. Rebecca and Potter were caught, but they'd been planning to destroy him long before the FBI got involved. And somewhere in all of this, there were still loose ends. Terry Garza called as Lance pulled into the parking lot. You heard about the arrests? I'm just coming from the hospital. Then you don't know the best part. Terry sounded gleeful. Remember that developer who was supposedly buying your company assets? Mark Olson, owner of Olson Properties? What about him? He's being questioned by the FBI right now. Turns out he knew Potter from Chicago. They ran scams together. Potter was going to sell him your contracts at a fraction of their value. Then they'd split the profit after forcing you into bankruptcy. But Olson made the mistake of paying Potter a $25,000 consulting fee last month. Lance smiled. A genuine smile for the first time in days. So they're all going down. Every single one. It's beautiful, boss. Like watching a controlled demolition. And Lance, who built buildings for a living, knew exactly what Terry meant. Sometimes you couldn't renovate a structure. Sometimes you had to tear it down to the foundation and start over. Chapter 4, Collateral Damage. The story broke in the Boston Globe 3 days later. Prominent nonprofit director arrested in major fraud scheme. The article detailed Rebecca Anthony Goldstein's fall from grace, complete with photos from charity galas where she'd smiled beside the same donors she'd stolen from. Greg Potter was mentioned as a co-conspirator with a history of similar schemes. Mark Olson's name appeared in connection with conspiracy charges. Lance's name was absent, except for one line. Her husband, Lance Goldstein of Goldstein Development, is cooperating with federal investigators. The phone started ringing before dawn. Clients wanting reassurance, reporters seeking comments, acquaintances expressing shock. Lance's lawyer, Sherry Bauer, handled most of it with brutal efficiency. "Your reputation is actually improving," she told him during a meeting at her office. "Everyone knows you're the victim here. Several clients have called to specifically praise your integrity in cooperating with the FBI. What's the timeline for the divorce?" "Fast. Given the criminal charges, Rebecca has no leverage. We'll file for divorce on grounds of fraud and adultery. Her assets will be seized to pay restitution for the nonprofit theft, so she can't touch them in settlement anyway. You'll keep the house, the company, everything." Sherry leaned back in her chair. "Lance, this is the cleanest divorce I've ever handled for someone in your position. Most men in your situation would be fighting for years, losing half their assets. You're going to walk away whole. Because I was patient. Because you were smart. You documented everything. You didn't react emotionally. And you let the criminals commit bigger crimes than anything they did to you." Sherry smiled. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you planned it this way." Lance didn't confirm or deny. The truth was complicated. He'd known Rebecca was stealing from him, had suspected fraud at her nonprofit, but hadn't known about Potter's elaborate scheme or Mark Olson's involvement. He'd simply gathered evidence and waited for the right moment to use it. The FBI investigation had been luck, or perhaps karma. But not everyone saw it that way. That evening, Lance returned to his hotel to find Marjorie Anthony waiting in the lobby. She looked 10 years older than she had at the hospital, her clothes hanging loose on her diminished frame. "Marjorie, you shouldn't be here. I need to talk to you." Her voice was firm despite her appearance. "Please, Lance. 5 minutes." They sat in the corner of the lobby bar, away from other patrons. Marjorie ordered scotch. Neat, expensive. Lance noticed her hands shook slightly as she lifted the glass. "I owe you an apology," she began. "I pushed Rebecca toward you. I knew she was difficult, self-centered, but you were stable, successful, kind. I thought marriage would settle her, that you'd be a good influence." She laughed bitterly. "I was wrong. You didn't make her steal money or cheat on me. No, but I taught her that appearances mattered more than character, that the right marriage was about social position, not love. Her father did the same thing, married me for my family name while he gambled away our money." Marjorie met Lance's eyes. "She's going to prison, isn't she?" "Yes. The evidence is overwhelming." "Good." The word was quiet but fierce. "She needs to face consequences. For the first time in her life, she needs to understand that actions have prices." Marjorie finished her scotch. "But Lance, I have to ask, did you know? When you married her, did you see what she was?" Lance considered lying, considered sparing this woman's feelings. But Marjorie deserved honesty. "I saw someone ambitious and confident. I thought those were positive traits. But yes, there were signs, her materialism, her contempt for people she considered beneath her. I ignored them because I was lonely, and she made me feel important." He paused. "We all make bad choices when we want something badly enough. What will you do now?" "Rebuild. My company, my life. Find someone who values the same things I do." He stood. "Marjorie, you're not responsible for Rebecca's choices. Don't let her destroy you too." As he walked away, Marjorie called out, "Lance, thank you for not becoming cruel. You could have, after what she did. Most men would have." Lance nodded and left, but her words followed him. The truth was, he'd thought about cruelty. In his darkest moments, planning his revenge, he'd imagined elaborate ways to humiliate Rebecca, to make her suffer the way she'd made him suffer. But ultimately, he'd chosen a different path, not out of mercy, but out of practicality. Cruelty was messy. It left scars, and Lance had built his career on clean, precise work. The next day, Terry Garza called with an update. "Potter's singing like a canary. He's given the FBI names, dates, account numbers. He's trying to shave years off his sentence." "What's he saying about Rebecca?" "That's the interesting part. He's claiming she was the mastermind, that she recruited him specifically because of his previous cons, that she wanted his expertise in stealing from nonprofits." Terry chuckled. "It's obviously bullshit. Potter's been running these schemes for years, but he's throwing Rebecca under the bus to save himself. Will it work? Doubtful. The FBI isn't stupid, and your evidence shows Rebecca was being manipulated. but it might muddy the waters enough that they both get moderate sentences instead of maximum. Terry paused. There's something else. Potter's lawyer reached out to yours. They want to negotiate. Negotiate what? Potter claims he has information about threats against you. Says Rebecca and Mark Olson discussed eliminating the problem, meaning you. They want to trade that information for a better deal. Lance felt ice in his veins. Eliminating. Could be bluster. Could be real. Vaughn at the FBI is taking it seriously enough to investigate. They're pulling phone records, checking for any connections to contract criminals. Terry's voice hardened. Boss, if this is real, you need protection. No. If it's real, we use it. Call Sherry. Tell her we want everything Potter knows, but we're not agreeing to any deal that reduces his sentence. He can tell us what he knows and hope it counts as cooperation, or he can keep quiet and face the full weight of federal conspiracy charges. You want to play hardball with a guy who might have been planning to kill you? He won't do anything now. He's in federal custody, facing decades in prison. His only play is cooperation. So let him cooperate, for free. Terry was quiet for a moment. You're a cold son of a bitch, you know that? I learned from the best. You taught me that criminals always overplay their hand if you're patient enough. 2 days later, Agent Vaughn called Lance directly. Potter's given us details. According to him, Mark Olson suggested arranging an accident for you about 6 weeks ago. Potter claims he refused, said it was too risky. But Olson allegedly contacted someone. Potter doesn't know who. We're investigating. You think Olson actually tried to have me killed? I think Olson is an idiot who watched too many crime movies. We've been monitoring his communications since Potter was arrested. Nothing suggests he actually followed through. But we're charging him with conspiracy to commit murder for hire. Even if he didn't go through with it, soliciting a hit is a federal crime. Lance processed this. Rebecca had married him, stolen from him, planned to destroy his company, and her partners had discussed killing him. It was almost impressive in its thoroughness. What do you need from me? Your testimony when this goes to trial. And Lance, watch your back, just in case Olson was more competent than we think. That night, Lance couldn't sleep. He lay in his hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how close he'd come to something far worse than divorce. If Potter had been more ruthless, if Olson had found the right criminal contact, Lance might be dead instead of filing paperwork. His phone buzzed with a text from Jimmy Reynolds. Saw the news about Olson. You okay, boss? Lance typed back, fine. Company's secure. See you Monday. Need anything, you call. Some of the guys used to run with rough crowds. We got your back. Lance smiled. Jimmy was offering protection in his own way, suggesting that if Olson's threat was real, Lance had his own people. It was touching and slightly alarming. Lance didn't want violence, didn't want to sink to that level. But it was good to know he had options. Chapter 5, The First Move. 3 weeks after Rebecca's arrest, Lance moved back into the brownstone. Rebecca's belongings had been seized by the FBI or removed by Marjorie. Greg Potter's presence had been erased. The house felt hollow, like a movie set waiting for actors. Lance walked through the rooms, assessing damage. Rebecca had taken petty revenge before her arrest. Slashed couch cushions, poured bleach on carpets, smashed framed photos of Lance's grandparents. The destruction was emotional, childish. It confirmed what Lance had suspected. Beneath Rebecca's calculated exterior was someone who'd never learned to handle loss. He hired a cleaning service, replaced the ruined items, and slowly made the house his again. New furniture, new paint colors, new everything. By the end of the month, the brownstone looked nothing like it had during his marriage. Goldstein Development was thriving. 2 new clients had approached Lance after reading about his cooperation with the FBI. We want to work with someone ethical, one said. The construction industry has too many cowboys cutting corners. You're different. The Harbor Street project, the one Rebecca and Potter had tried to sabotage, was completed ahead of schedule and under budget. The client was so pleased they referred Lance to 3 other historic building owners. Within 6 weeks of Rebecca's arrest, Lance's company had more work than it had in 3 years. But Lance wasn't satisfied with mere survival. He'd been wronged, betrayed, nearly murdered. And while the legal system was handling Rebecca, Potter, and Olson, Lance wanted something more personal, a message sent, a lesson taught. He met with Terry Garza at their usual diner. I need you to find someone for me. Who? Greg Potter has family somewhere, right? Parents, siblings. Terry frowned. You're not going after his family, are you? Because that's a line I won't cross, even for you. Nothing like that. I want to understand Potter. What made him this way? Who taught him to manipulate people? Lance stirred his coffee. Find his family. Talk to them. I need to know his full story. Why? Because Rebecca made a choice when she hired him. She saw something in Potter that told her he'd be useful. I want to know what that was. And I want to know if there are others out there like him, targeting people like me. Terry studied Lance for a long moment. You're not planning revenge anymore, are you? You're planning prevention. Maybe both. A week later, Terry provided a report. Greg Potter had grown up in Ohio, the son of Ruth Holmes, a single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to raise him. Potter's father was unknown. His childhood was marked by evictions, food insecurity, and his mother's string of abusive boyfriends. Potter was smart, Terry explained. Scholarship to Ohio State, business degree. But his mother got sick with cancer during his junior year. He dropped out to care for her, accumulated massive debt. She died 6 months later. That's when Potter started running cons, insurance fraud first, then moving into nonprofit schemes. So he's a victim of circumstance. Lance felt his anger wavering. He's a guy who made bad choices and kept making them. Plenty of people face hardship without becoming criminals. Terry slid another document across. But here's the thing. Potter's been arrested 3 times, walked away twice with slaps on the wrist. He learned the system protects people who look respectable. Your wife gave him that respectability. And Mark Olson? Grew up rich, squandered it, spent 20 years trying to get it back through increasingly illegal means. He met Potter at a real estate fraud seminar. Yeah, those exist. They've been partners on and off for 5 years. Lance absorbed this. Neither Potter nor Olson were sympathetic figures, but they were human, complex, flawed, shaped by choices and circumstances. It didn't excuse what they'd done, but it explained it. What about Rebecca's sentencing? Hearings in 2 weeks. Federal prosecutor is recommending 8 years with possibility of parole after 5. Potter's looking at 10, Olson at 15, including the murder conspiracy. 8 years. Rebecca would be 41 when she got out, her entire life restructured by her choices. Lance tried to feel satisfaction, but instead felt something closer to exhaustion. That night, Sherry Bauer called with news. Rebecca's lawyer wants to meet. She's offering full cooperation in exchange for your support at her sentencing hearing. She wants me to speak on her behalf. Lance couldn't help laughing. After everything? She's desperate. Her lawyer thinks a testimony from the wronged husband might influence the judge, show she's remorseful, has support for rehabilitation. What do you think? I think she doesn't deserve your mercy. But Lance, this is your call. If you want closure, if you want to face her one more time, this is your chance. Lance thought about it for a long time. Then he said, set up the meeting. But Sherry? I'm not making any promises. Chapter 6, The Confrontation. The conference room at Sherry Bauer's law office was designed for intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. A table that could seat 20, original artwork on the walls. Rebecca sat at one end with her public defender, a tired-looking woman named Constance Simons. Rebecca looked diminished in her jail jumpsuit, her auburn hair pulled back, no makeup to hide the circles under her eyes. Lance entered with Sherry. He didn't sit immediately, instead standing at the window, looking out at the city. Thank you for coming, Rebecca said quietly. Lance turned. Your lawyer said you wanted to talk. I wanted to apologize. Face to face, not through lawyers or letters. Rebecca's voice was steady but strained. What I did was unforgivable. The affair, the theft, the plan to destroy your company, all of it. I hurt you in ways I can't undo. Why? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Why did I do it? Why did you marry me if you had so much contempt for who I am? Lance sat down across from her. I've spent months trying to understand. You could have just divorced me, taken half the assets, moved on. Why the elaborate cruelty? Rebecca was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was raw. Because you were everything I thought I should want, and being with you made me feel like a failure. You were kind, stable, hardworking, qualities everyone told me were valuable. But I felt suffocated. I wanted excitement, risk, the kind of life where things mattered. She laughed bitterly. Turns out what I thought was excitement was just criminal stupidity. You felt trapped, so you tried to burn everything down. I wanted you to hurt the way I was hurting. I wanted you to feel as small and worthless as I felt. Rebecca met his eyes. I was wrong. About everything. You weren't the problem. I was. Lance studied her. This could be manipulation, one final con to reduce her sentence. Or it could be genuine. He realized he'd never be certain which. What do you want from me, Rebecca? I want you to tell the judge that I'm not evil, that I made terrible choices, but I'm not beyond redemption. She leaned forward. Lance, I'm going to prison no matter what. But if you speak on my behalf, I might get out in 5 years instead of 8. I'll be 41 instead of 44. I'll have a chance to rebuild. Why should I care about that? Because you're better than me. You always were. Rebecca's voice cracked. I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm asking anyway. Lance looked at Sherry, who gave him a barely perceptible shrug. Your call. I'll think about it, Lance said finally. But Rebecca, understand something. I'm not doing this for you. If I speak, it'll be because I want to be the kind of person who can show mercy, not because you've earned it. That's fair. And there's a condition. You tell me the full truth about what you and Potter were planning. No more lies, no more games. I want to know exactly how far you were willing to go. Rebecca glanced at her lawyer, who nodded reluctantly. We were going to frame you, Rebecca said quietly. Potter had documents prepared, forged emails showing you knew about the nonprofit fraud, falsified records suggesting you were laundering money through your construction company. If you'd fought the divorce, if you tried to keep assets, we were going to turn you in to the FBI and claim you forced us into the scheme. Lance felt the rage return, white-hot and pure. You were going to send me to prison. Yes. Potter said it was the only way to protect ourselves if he got suspicious. He had contingencies planned for everything. She paused. Except for you actually documenting our crimes. He never anticipated you'd be smart enough to investigate us first. What about Mark Olson's plan to kill me? Rebecca's face went pale. I didn't know about that. Potter told me Olson would handle the business side. I thought he meant paying off inspectors or something. When I heard about the murder conspiracy charge, I nearly had a stroke. Do you expect me to believe you? No, but it's true. I wanted to hurt you, humiliate you, take everything you'd built. But I didn't want you dead. Tears streamed down her face. I'm a lot of things, Lance, but I'm not a killer. Lance stood. I'll be at your sentencing. What I say is still undecided. He left without looking back. In the car, Sherry said, You handled that well. I wanted to scream at her. Tell her exactly what I thought of her pathetic excuses. But you didn't. Because you're playing a longer game. Sherry smiled. You want the judge to see you as magnanimous. If you show mercy, it makes you look strong. And it makes Rebecca's crimes look even worse. She betrayed a genuinely good man. Lance hadn't thought of it that way, but Sherry was right. His mercy would be its own kind of revenge, a public display of moral superiority that Rebecca would have to live with forever. Set it up, he told Sherry. I'll speak at her sentencing. Chapter 7. The Testimony. The federal courthouse was granite and glass, imposing in the way government buildings always are. Lance arrived early, wearing his best suit, charcoal gray, tailored, expensive but not ostentatious. Sherry had coached him. Looked successful but not wealthy, confident but not arrogant. The courtroom filled quickly. Federal agents, prosecutors, Rebecca's family, journalists. Marjorie Anthony sat in the back row, her face carefully neutral. She nodded to Lance as he passed, but didn't speak. Rebecca was brought in wearing a blue prison uniform, her hands cuffed. She'd lost weight, her face gaunt but composed. When she saw Lance, something flickered in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or fear. Judge Albert Byrd presided, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for tough but fair sentencing. The prosecution went first, laying out the scope of Rebecca's crimes. For $117,000 stolen from the nonprofit, $73,000 from Lance's accounts, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice for attempting to destroy evidence. Ms. Goldstein showed calculated disregard for the law and for the people who trusted her, the prosecutor said. She used her position, her family name, and her marriage as tools of deception. The government recommends 8 years in federal prison. Rebecca's lawyer, Constance Simons, argued for leniency. My client acknowledges her guilt and accepts responsibility. She cooperated fully once arrested, providing evidence against co-conspirators Greg Potter and Mark Olson. She comes from a background of privilege that ill-prepared her for ethical decision-making, and she fell under the influence of career criminals. It was a weak defense, and everyone knew it. But Simons did her job competently. Then it was time for victim impact statements. Lance stood, walked to the podium, and cleared his throat. Every eye in the courtroom was on him. "Your Honor, my name is Lance Goldstein. Rebecca Goldstein is my soon-to-be ex-wife." He paused, organizing his thoughts. 6 months ago, I loved her. I thought we were building a life together. I thought the difficulties in our marriage were normal, the kind of problems all couples face. I was wrong. What Rebecca did wasn't a mistake or a crime of passion. She planned systematically to destroy me. She stole my money, betrayed my trust, and plotted with criminals to take everything I'd built. When I discovered her affair, I didn't react with violence or rage. I documented evidence, cooperated with authorities, and let justice take its course. Lance looked directly at Rebecca. "Rebecca, you told me I was boring and predictable. You were right. I am predictable. I follow the law. I honor my commitments. I treat people with respect. Those are qualities you found contemptible, but they're also why I'm standing here as a successful businessman while you're facing prison. Your Honor, I'm not here to ask for leniency. Rebecca made her choices knowing the consequences. But I am here to state for the record that I don't hate her. I pity her. She had every advantage, education, connections, a husband who loved her, and she squandered it all chasing excitement with a con artist. Whatever sentence you impose, I'll accept it as just. But I hope Rebecca uses her time in prison to become the person she pretended to be, someone capable of honesty, remorse, and growth." Lance sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Bird reviewed his notes, then addressed Rebecca. "Ms. Goldstein, do you have anything to say before I pass sentence?" Rebecca stood, her voice steady. "Your Honor, I am deeply ashamed of my actions. I betrayed people who trusted me, hurt someone who loved me, and violated the law. I have no excuses. I accept full responsibility and whatever punishment you deem appropriate. I only hope that someday I can make amends and prove I'm capable of better." The judge nodded. "Ms. Rebecca Anthony Goldstein, you are hereby sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 5 years served. You will pay full restitution to the victims of your fraud, and you are permanently barred from holding positions of financial trust in any charitable organization." 7 years, one less than recommended. Lance's testimony had mattered, but not enough to dramatically change the outcome. Rebecca was led away, her shoulders slumped. As Lance left the courthouse, Marjorie Anthony approached. "Thank you for what you said. It was kinder than she deserved. I meant every word. I do pity her. Will you be all right, Lance?" "I already am. The question is, will you?" Marjorie smiled sadly. "I'll survive. I always do. Maybe I'll even learn something from this disaster." She touched his arm gently. "You deserved better than my daughter. I hope you find it." Lance watched her walk away, a woman carrying the weight of her family's failures. He felt a strange kinship with her. They'd both loved Rebecca, both been hurt by her, both had to find ways to move forward. Greg Potter's sentencing was 2 weeks later, 12 years. Mark Olson got 18, including the murder conspiracy. Potter's cooperation had earned him nothing but contempt from the judge, who noted that trying to blame everyone else showed a complete lack of moral character. Lance didn't attend those hearings. He'd said his piece. The rest was simply bureaucracy. Chapter 8. The Closure. Spring came to Boston with the sudden warmth that always surprised Lance. 1 year since Rebecca had brought Potter home, since Lance's carefully constructed life had imploded. Now he stood in that same brownstone, completely renovated, hosting a party for his employees and their families. Jimmy Reynolds was there with his wife, Marcy Lane, a nurse who'd grown up 3 blocks away from Jimmy. They were expecting their first child, and Jimmy kept touching Marcy's growing belly with a mix of wonder and terror. "Boss, this place looks amazing," Jimmy said, surveying the open-concept kitchen Lance had installed. "Nothing like it used to be. That was the idea. Fresh start." Roland Glenn, Lance's accountant, approached with a beer. "Lance, I've been doing your books for 8 years, and this is the best fiscal quarter you've ever had. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Just taking care of business, Roland. No distractions." Terry Garza arrived late, as always. He pulled Lance aside into the study, Lance's new office, where he worked from home most days. "Got some news you'll want to hear," Terry said. "Remember how I've been keeping tabs on Potter in prison? I told you to stop doing that." "Yeah, well, I don't follow orders well. Anyway, Potter got jumped last week. Another inmate, guy named Ralph Luna, used to run a nonprofit in Chicago. Turns out Potter screwed him over 6 years ago, cost Luna his reputation and his marriage. Luna's been waiting for a chance at payback. Is Potter okay? Broken ribs, some bruises. He'll survive. But the word is, he's been moved to protective custody. Turns out when you spend your life scamming people, you make enemies in unexpected places. Lance should have felt satisfaction, but instead felt nothing. Potter's fate was no longer his concern. Terry, I appreciate everything you've done, but I'm done looking backward. Whatever happens to Potter, Rebecca, any of them, it's not my problem anymore. Terry studied him. You know what, boss? I think you actually mean that. Most people, they'd want updates forever, would stay obsessed. But you've genuinely moved on. Life's too short to carry grudges. I got justice. My company's thriving. I'm happier now than I was a year ago. Lance smiled. The best revenge is living well, right? Damn straight. The party continued into the evening. Lance stood on his back deck, watching the sunset paint the Boston skyline in gold and crimson. He thought about the man he'd been a year ago, cautious, maybe a little naive, definitely lonely. That man had been hurt badly, but he'd also been smart enough to protect himself, patient enough to wait for the right moment, and strong enough not to become cruel in his pain. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Goldstein, this is Constance Simons, Rebecca's attorney. She asked me to tell you that she's working in the prison library, taking correspondence courses in social work. She wanted you to know she's trying to be better. She doesn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted you to know. Lance deleted the message without responding. Rebecca's redemption, if it ever happened, wasn't his concern. She'd made her choices. Now she was living with them. A voice behind him. Lance Goldstein? He turned to find a woman standing in the doorway, petite, with dark hair and intelligent eyes. She looked vaguely familiar. I'm Eileen Gamble, Jimmy's cousin. He invited me. She smiled uncertainly. This is awkward, but he's been trying to set us up for months. I told him no because I knew you were married, but then I heard about the divorce, and Jimmy said you were doing much better, and I figured it couldn't hurt to at least say hello. Lance laughed, genuinely laughed. Jimmy's not subtle, is he? Not even a little. Look, I know this is weird. You don't have to. What do you do, Eileen? I'm an architect. Historic preservation, mostly. I restore old buildings. She paused, which I realize sounds suspiciously like your business. Jimmy says you're good at what you do. Jimmy's biased, but I try. Lance extended his hand. Why don't you tell me about your work? I'm always interested in meeting people who care about preservation. They talked for an hour, easily and naturally. Eileen was funny, passionate about her work, and refreshingly direct. When she mentioned an ex-husband who'd left her for his personal trainer, Lance found himself telling her about Rebecca. Not the full story, but enough to explain his caution. So you're not looking for a relationship, Eileen said matter-of-factly. I'm not looking. I'm just careful now. That's fair. Tell you what, my firm is renovating a Victorian in Cambridge. Would you want to consult? Professional only, no pressure. If we work well together, great. If not, at least we'll have restored a beautiful building. Lance smiled. I'd like that. As the party wound down and guests departed, Lance cleaned up with Jimmy's help. So, you and Eileen, Jimmy said with a grin. She's good people, boss. Been through some stuff, came out stronger. Like you. We're just going to work together on a project. Sure. Whatever you say. Jimmy headed for the door, then turned back. Hey, boss. I'm proud of you. What you did this past year. Not just surviving, but building something better. That takes real strength. After everyone left, Lance walked through his quiet house. Every room was different from how it had been during his marriage. The furniture was new, the colors were his choice, the memories were fresh and untainted. He stood in his bedroom, once his and Rebecca's, now just his, and realized something. He was happy, not the desperate happiness of someone trying to convince themselves, but the quiet contentment of someone who'd faced the worst and come through intact. His phone rang. Marjorie Anthony. Lance, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. What's up? I wanted you to know I'm selling the house. The family home. Too many memories, too much space for one person. She paused. I'm moving to Maine, buying a small cottage near the coast. Starting over, in my own way. That sounds wonderful. I also wanted to thank you one more time. You could have destroyed Rebecca completely in that courtroom, but you showed restraint. I think the judge took note of that. I'm not a destroyer, Marjorie. I'm a builder. Yes, you are. She sounded like she was smiling. Take care of yourself, Lance. After she hung up, Lance made himself a drink and settled into his favorite chair. Tomorrow he'd meet with Eileen about the Cambridge project. Next week, he'd break ground on a new renovation in the North End. His life was full of possibilities, unburdened by betrayal or revenge. Rebecca had said he was boring and predictable. Maybe she was right. But boring and predictable had built a good life, had protected him when things went wrong, and had given him the foundation to rebuild stronger than before. Lance raised his glass in a silent toast. To second chances, to smart decisions, to the patient satisfaction of watching your enemies destroy themselves while you simply stand back and build something better. Chapter 9. The New Foundation. 6 months later, Lance stood in front of the restored Victorian in Cambridge with Eileen Gamble, reviewing the final details. The building had been a disaster when they'd started. Crumbling facade, rotted interior, decades of neglect. Now it gleamed with original woodwork restored, modern systems hidden seamlessly behind historic charm. This is our best work, Eileen said, her hand brushing his as they shared the blueprint. The touch was casual now, comfortable. They'd been seeing each other for 3 months, slowly, carefully, both of them wary of rushing. You did the hard part. I just made sure it didn't fall down. Liar. Your structural work saved the whole building. She looked up at him. We make a good team. We do. They stood in silence, watching the sunset cast golden light on their restoration. This was the 4th project they'd completed together, each one more successful than the last. Word was spreading. Goldstein and Gamble, the preservation duo who could resurrect buildings everyone else had written off. Lance's phone buzzed. A message from Terry Garza. Potter got moved to a federal facility in Kentucky. Heard through the grapevine, he's been beaten 3 more times. Turns out prison's full of people who hate con artists. Olson's in solitary after trying to bribe a guard. Rebecca's apparently a model prisoner. Thought you'd want to know. Lance deleted the message. He didn't need those updates anymore. His old life was truly behind him. Everything okay? Eileen asked. Just an old contact. Nothing important. He turned to her. Dinner tonight? There's this new Italian place in the North End. Can't. I have to meet with the Historical Society about the Beacon Hill project. She paused. But I'm free tomorrow. We could cook at my place. I make a mean lasagna. Tomorrow works. They parted with a brief kiss, still new enough to be exciting, familiar enough to feel safe. Lance watched her drive away, then headed to his office. Goldstein Development had expanded. Lance had hired 2 new project managers, brought on an intern from MIT's architecture program, and leased larger office space in Fort Point. Jimmy Reynolds was now a full partner, overseeing day-to-day operations while Lance focused on strategic growth. Boss, got a call from the mayor's office, Jimmy said as Lance entered. They want to discuss the waterfront preservation project. Something about you being their first choice for contractor. Set up a meeting for next week. Already did. Wednesday at 10. Jimmy grinned. We're moving up in the world. A year ago, we were scraping by. Now the city's calling us. Lance reviewed the plans for their current projects. 5 active renovations, 3 more in the pipeline, a waiting list of clients. Every building they restored added to their reputation. Every satisfied client referred 2 more. The business Lance had almost lost to Rebecca's schemes was now bigger and stronger than ever, not because of revenge or spite, but because Lance had focused on doing excellent work while his enemies self-destructed. That evening, he returned to the brownstone. The house that had once represented a failed marriage now felt like home. He'd added personal touches, photos of his grandfather, artwork from local Boston artists, a bookshelf filled with architecture and history texts. He poured himself a scotch and sat on the back deck. The city stretched out before him, lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled in. He thought about where he'd been a year and a half ago, betrayed, humiliated, his carefully built life crumbling. He'd survived by being patient, by documenting everything, by not reacting emotionally, by letting his enemies commit bigger crimes than anything they'd done to him, and ultimately, by choosing to build something new rather than wallowing in what he'd lost. His phone rang. Sherry Bauer. Lance, I have news. Rebecca's lawyers filed for early release consideration. Already? She's barely served 2 years. Model prisoner, completed her courses, working as a counselor for other inmates. The parole board is considering it, though I doubt they'll approve. But I wanted you to know in case you need to file opposition. I won't oppose it. You sure? After what she did. I'm sure. If Rebecca's genuinely changed, good for her. If she's just playing the system, she'll screw up again and end up back inside. Either way, it's not my concern anymore. Sherry was quiet for a moment. You know, Lance, I've represented a lot of people through divorces. Most of them stay angry for years, stay obsessed with their ex. You really have moved on. Life's too good to waste time on the past. After they hung up, Lance received another text. This one from Eileen. Just realized tomorrow's the anniversary of your separation from Rebecca. If you need to cancel dinner, I understand. Lance smiled and typed back, no way. I'm celebrating. That separation was the best thing that ever happened to me. Bold words. I like it. See you tomorrow. The next day was busy with meetings, site visits, and planning sessions. Lance barely thought about the anniversary until Jimmy mentioned it over lunch. Weird, right? A year and a half ago you were at rock bottom. Now you're dating an amazing woman, the company's thriving, and you're about to land the mayor's waterfront project. Not rock bottom, Lance corrected. Rock bottom would have been letting Rebecca destroy me. I had a bad few weeks, then I started building again. That's what I do. Still, most guys would have fallen apart. Most guys don't document evidence for 3 months before their wives betray them. Jimmy laughed. Fair point. You were always 3 steps ahead. That evening, Lance and Eileen cooked together at her apartment in South Boston. She'd lived there for 4 years, ever since her divorce. It was small but carefully decorated, every piece of furniture chosen with an artist's eye. I heard Rebecca might get early parole, Eileen said as they assembled the lasagna. Jimmy told me. How do you feel about it? Indifferent. She's not my problem anymore. That's healthy. Eileen layered noodles carefully. My ex-husband sent me a friend request on Facebook last month. His marriage to the trainer fell apart, and now he wants to reconnect. I blocked him immediately. Good for you. The thing is, I realized I don't even care what happens to him anymore. For years I was so angry, so bitter. But now, he's just some guy I used to know who made bad choices. She met Lance's eyes. You're the same way with Rebecca, aren't you? Exactly the same. She's just someone who was in my life briefly and taught me important lessons. What lessons? Lance thought about it. That patience beats rage. That documentation beats emotion. That the best revenge is building something better than what you lost. He smiled. And that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually a gift in disguise. They ate dinner on Eileen's balcony, watching boats drift across the harbor. The conversation flowed easily. Work, family, hopes for the future. Eileen talked about opening her own firm someday, focusing exclusively on historic preservation. Lance talked about expanding Goldstein development into residential properties, creating affordable housing in renovated buildings. We could partner on that, Eileen suggested. Your construction expertise, my design work. We could make a real difference. I'd like that. We should draw up a formal proposal. As the evening wound down, Eileen leaned against Lance's shoulder. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever worry you'll make the same mistake twice? Pick someone who seems great, but turns out to be terrible? Every day? But then I remember that Rebecca was never good at hiding who she was. I ignored the warning signs because I wanted to be married, wanted to have built a life partnership like my grandparents had. He turned to face her. With you, there are no warning signs. Just a woman who's honest, talented, and has her own life together. That's completely different. I'm scared too, Eileen admitted. My ex destroyed my confidence. Made me feel worthless. It took years to rebuild. She kissed him gently. But you're worth the risk. They stayed on the balcony until late, talking about everything and nothing. When Lance finally drove home, he felt a contentment that went deeper than happiness. He'd survived betrayal, fought back with intelligence instead of rage, and emerged stronger. He'd turned disaster into opportunity, loss into growth. His phone buzzed as he parked, a news alert. Former nonprofit director Rebecca Goldstein denied early parole. Lance read the article. The parole board had ruled that while Rebecca showed progress, 2 years wasn't sufficient time served for the magnitude of her crimes. She'd be eligible again in 18 months. He closed the article without finishing it. Rebecca's fate was in the hands of the justice system and her own choices. Lance had no part in that story anymore. He walked into his brownstone, poured a celebratory drink, and raised his glass to the empty room. To new foundations, he said aloud, built on honesty, patience, and the wisdom to know when to tear down the old and start fresh. The house echoed with possibility. Tomorrow he'd meet with the mayor's office about the waterfront project. Next week he'd tour a potential new renovation with Eileen. Next month, Goldstein Development would celebrate its 10th anniversary with their best year on record. Lance Goldstein had been betrayed, stolen from, and nearly destroyed. And in response, he'd done the most powerful thing possible. He'd built something better than what he'd lost. Not through revenge or cruelty, but through patience, intelligence, and the unshakable belief that the best victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from thriving while they destroy themselves. He finished his drink, turned off the lights, and climbed the stairs to his bedroom. Tomorrow was a new day, full of projects to complete, businesses to grow, and a life to live, a life entirely his own, built on a foundation that no betrayal could ever shake. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.